Hi, friends. Welcome to episode 29 of Your Story Within podcast. Today we have Susan K. Beatty. She's the author of Carmen's Journey of Courage. And we're going to have an exciting time. So, who says you can't begin a career after middle age? Certainly not Susan. Susan is proof that you can start a fiction writing career at any age. Susan is a professional writer and journalist who is very active in the writer community. She has authored several books, which you will hear about today. She is passionate about writing stories that show characters finding courage through faith and grit and experiencing the Lord's faithfulness. Now, friends, there was a little bit of a hiccup with the time scheduling today. So Susan very graciously met with me previously to pre-record our interview. So you're not going to miss a thing. I'm going to go ahead and play the media clip for you so you can hear her fantastic advice. And then I will come back on the line and take any questions. So let's get started. All right, Susan, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for inviting me.
How is the weather? You're in California, is that right?
Yes, and it's beautiful today. Low 70s, sunny.
Oh, nice. I'm in Virginia Beach, and it's been cold until today. It's been in the 70s, so awesome.
Well, great. You're having California weather too.
That's right. So let's just jump right in. So did you always want to be an author?
Since I was in elementary school, I wanted to write novels and short stories and all of that. I wrote little stories about crossing the prairie and covered wagons. I don't know how I thought I knew anything about that, but I was writing all these little stories. And in high school, in junior high and high school and college, I went into journalism, figuring that being a novelist was probably not going to be very income producing. So I went into journalism, tech writing, and yet still always wanted to be an author, a writer and an author. And then the Lord dropped me into the very beginning of the homeschooling movement back in the early 80s.
Okay.
So I spent the next 35 years, in addition to teaching my children, writing for the homeschooling community. Wrote a book for our homeschoolers, how to get started in California.
Okay.
But I still always had this desire to write fiction. And the Lord seemed not to give me that go ahead until about 5 years ago.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Our paths are similar, although I don't write fiction yet. I do a lot of nonfiction writing, and but like you, I also wanted to write when I was younger, and I remember writing and illustrating, where you take the paper and you fold it in half and you staple it,
Right.
and you illustrate your stories,
I wrote in those little school folders that were stapled, that they're already made for you. I forgot what they're called, but
yes, I hear you. Awesome. Well, that's cool. So how long have you been an author now? You said 5 years, is that right? Or
my first published fiction work was in September 2019.
Okay.
And that was just a short, we called it a novelette, but it was really almost a short story. And that was just to introduce readers to me, my style, and what I want to write about, because the novel was already in process, under contract. So it's really only been 2 years that I've had fiction published.
Okay. Oh, that's so awesome. And I've had a lot of coffee today, so everything's going to be awesome and fantastic because I'm energized.
Good for me.
I'm energized today. So if you don't mind me asking, I know as women, we don't like to talk about our age or anything like that, but I know I have a lot of followers who are at different age ranges, different age groups for writing. And some of my older ladies they don't think they can do it because they are older. My mother's one included. She's in her 70s and she's like, well, I just don't know, but she's a fantastic storyteller. So would you mind sharing?
I do not mind at all because I feel that it's part of my story. I am 74.
Oh,
I had my first piece of fiction then published when I was 72. And I think it just goes to show you, and I hope your listeners and your readers will get the idea that it's never too late. It's never too late to start, especially if you feel that God is calling you to something, a new career, or to jump out of your comfort zone. It's never too late. Never.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And I wasn't sure what your age was. I read in your bio that you started later, and looking at you on screen, I know everybody who's looking, watching this podcast is thinking, there's no way she's in her 70s, because you look amazing. You do look fantastic.
Well, thank you. I'll pay you for that later.
No need. Really, we'll have to talk offline so I can figure out what your beauty regimen is.
Oh. A lot of makeup.
Okay, so do you only write Christian books? Now, you said the homeschool education book, but other than that, is it just Christian fiction or?
Yes, I have. Way in the past, of course, I've written a lot of articles for newspapers, and I wrote a lot of technical stuff when I was a technical writer. And then when I was in the homeschooling community, I wrote a book, a nonfiction book about how to get started in homeschooling, and a lot of homeschooling articles. Since I've retired from that and become a fiction writer, I still write articles for a couple of magazines. One is the Because Fiction magazine.
Yes.
So I write for that. And every once in a while, I get to write an article for a digital magazine called TWJ. I never can remember what that stands for. But I get to write for that. And of course, I write an author's newsletter. I write posts for for Facebook and all of that. So it all ties in with my fiction, but it isn't fiction. I have no plans at the moment to write any nonfiction books.
Okay.
I started when I first decided to retire and to start out writing fiction. I had a project that I thought I would write that were short stories in a book about homeschoolers. So each short story was a story of a homeschool family and their struggle, and they were all in the same support group and that. And I wasn't getting any joy out of that. And so finally, it was impressed upon me that if I wasn't getting joy on it, that's not what the Lord wanted me to write. So I moved on to strictly fiction and not thinking about, I'm just not even involved in the homeschooling community anymore, even though I still support it.
Okay. That makes sense. And now that you've said that, I want to make sure the audience knows where they can find your books. And then it's going to prompt me to talk about something else. But I'm going to bring up your page first. So let me bring it up here. Let's see. I think this one's it. Okay. Can you see your website?
I can. I see my face and my bio there.
There we go. Yes. Okay. So let's look at the books because I want the audience to see the books that you've written. So here they are.
There they are. And right down there in the middle is that homeschool manual.
Oh, yes. And we're going to talk about Carmen's Journey of Courage today. But I wanted the audience to notice you have a lot of books with courage in them. And then I saw on your bio here that you have a tagline, Courage, the Intersection of Faith and Grit.
Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, as I was deciding what to write about, there was really not much decision to make. I wanted to write about courage because my daughter has been on an 11 or 12 year breast cancer journey. She's been diagnosed 3 times, and the second time is metastatic. And when you diagnose with metastatic breast cancer, that's not curable. Now, she's had no evidence of disease for 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years.
Oh, praise God.
But, oh yes, praise God. But her relationship with the Lord was really tepid before this breast cancer. And she really got closer to the Lord. And I saw how that courage in her, with her new relationship and with her experiences, grew. And I wanted to encourage others to know that courage, while it can be look difficult to have, when we're facing things like breast cancer and grieving the loss of a loved one and so forth, it's possible. It's a matter of faith. And yet God also, when he calls us to step out and do something, he doesn't just say have faith and sit there. He calls us to step out and do something. And I wanted to use that tagline to encourage people. And I my first 3 books are about breast cancer, because I wanted to share not my daughter's story, but similar things. For example, in the novel Faces of Courage, that main character, Olivia, also faces domestic abuse. That's not my daughter's story at all. So that's another reason that I wanted to teach about courage, is because there's so many. Our life is fraught with issues that demand our courage, and I want to encourage people in that.
I love that. That's the first time that I've ever noticed an author having a tagline, I guess. So when I saw, I mean, they probably do. I just never paid attention, because like I said, I write more nonfiction, and I have 3 books out that are a series. And I just think series, and they're, it's God's way, and these are the books. I don't think of tagline. Tagline reminds me of my days in business.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be a strategic communication specialist, and we had taglines and, stuff like that. Talking points, taglines. Anyway, so when I saw that, it just caught my attention. And then I put 2 and 2 together. Oh, well, all the books, Courage, got it. I got to ask her about that. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Well, it's a good way for people to identify what you're writing before they even look further. Is that tagline something that would interest or spark interest in someone? And I forgot to mention, when we're talking about nonfiction, I have written a devotional.
Oh, okay.
Courage for Your Everyday Life, which is a series of flash fiction devotionals. So each devotional is about, 1,000 words, and then there's a thought and a verse and a prayer. So I have written something else. I had forgotten about that. But back to the tagline for a second. I have the series, a Faces of Courage series, which everything I've written that's been published so far is part of the Faces of Courage series. And I have 2 more novels in the series, and I will move on to another series, but I'll still keep my tagline, because I will still be writing about courage, just from maybe a different point of view.
Okay. Well, I like that. Audience, did you hear that? Authors, wannabe authors, that can keep you focused on, what you plan to write about. It kind of, as you were talking, Susan, it just made me think, as I continue to move forward on my journey to try to write fiction, those are just things that would keep me focused. I'm a very visual person, and I'm one of those, I hate to say it, but I'm not a pantser. I'm definitely an outliner. I'm very much an outliner. So, and I'm very logical. I have to go in an order. And my husband teases me all the time, because he says, well, you know what the end is, but you can't just jump around. And I'm like, no, that works for nonfiction, but I don't know how that's going to work so well with fiction. So there's a lot I'm going to have to learn.
I'm a pantser, but I still have to be doing a lot of thinking and a lot of gathering of information and coming up with character names and those kinds of things. And I do have a general idea of the plot progression, but I don't outline chapters and scenes and that kind of stuff. And yet I can't write a scene that I'm pretty sure is going to go at the end of the book before I get there, because things might change.
Right. Your character comes alive. And
yes.
Yeah, so I'm excited to venture into that area of writing, but I don't know when I'll do that. I'm still learning. I come from the world of academia and military, and everything's bottom line up front, no flowery language, take out all that. So trying to get my brain to go back to that, little girl, Janine, who used to write creatively, it's going to take some work.
Believe
So,
me, that was an issue as I started writing my fiction, because I have been thinking about fiction, reading about fiction, and reading fiction my entire life, and then writing nonfiction. So I thought, well, how hard can it be to transition to fiction? Oh boy, was I mistaken. As a journalist, I was taught to write very lean, and in nonfiction, other nonfiction works, you have to write fairly lean and all these logical points.
yes.
Fiction writing, there's a lot to learn about fiction writing. There's a million parts that you have to juggle. So keep learning. I'm still learning. I've been writing fiction now for 3 or 4 years, and yet I'm still a novice, a real novice.
Well, you write beautifully. Speaking of, I want to talk about the book that I read, and I think it is your latest, right? Carmen's Journey.
Yes, my latest.
Yes, I love that book. I was drawn to it because of the characters. Would you tell the audience a little bit about what the book is about, and then how did you decide on the characters?
Well, the book is about a young mother, homeschooling mom, surprise, surprise, who is kind of persona non grata in her family. She did not want to follow in her family's footsteps, which everybody in her family, all of her siblings have PhDs, and the oldest runs a big corporation, and the next one works for them, and they feel that being a stay-at-home mom is worthless. And instead of going to college, she joined the Army, became a weapons specialist, and then got married to to someone she met in the Army, and had children. And when they had children, she decided she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. But they have a great aunt in Mexico City, because that's where their parents are from. And this great aunt has having some health issues. So the older, mean, bossy sister says that Olivia, the main character, needs to go down and visit with their aunt and find out what's going on. The problem is there's a little bit of a secret in that the main character, Carmen, that I think I may have said Olivia earlier, but it's Carmen, feels that she has to go down there, and she's worried about it. And she feels that there needs to be some forgiveness for something that she did, and she's not sure if her great aunt will forgive her for that. So this journey of courage, she has to have courage to go there, courage to confront her aunt, and then some mysterious things happen while she's there, and she needs courage to follow through and to solve those, and hopefully end up with forgiveness.
Well, that was the first book of yours that I read. I plan to read all of the others because I love your style of writing. And again, what caught my attention was Carmen. I grew up in a Hispanic family, a Mexican family. And so as I was reading the book, you were using words that I was accustomed to, Tia, some of the food you had talked about. And I'm like, oh, that my heart was just, all excited. And just even the interactions with the siblings, the aunt, although my family didn't come from money or anything like that. I grew up in Racine, Wisconsin, so that's very far from Mexico City, but
yes.
but big Mexican family, and my stepfather's Mexican, so obviously I'm not, but so anyway, I gravitated towards it, and I'm glad I did, because it was such a fantastic story. I love novelettes because I don't have a lot of time. I have a business, I'm a professor, I do some volunteering. So when I see a novelette, I kind of jump, to them, and I just sat there and read the whole thing. I just couldn't stop reading it. So I loved it.
That.
So friends, if you want to see my review on the book and gain a little bit more information, let me share this so they know where to go as well. You can find it obviously on Susan's site that I shared earlier, and I'll post that tab in a minute. But I also have the information about the book here, so you can read a little bit more about it. And then my review of it, of course, I gave her 5 out of 5 stars, and that's why I had her on the show too, so I could talk to her and share all of the goodness with everybody here as well.
And I am so thankful for that review. It means so much to me coming from someone with your background and experience. And Carmen is, if you want to know a little bit more about Carmen, she's actually a character in my novel, Faces of Courage. She is the best friend of the main character. Olivia is the main character, and Carmen is Olivia's best friend in Faces of Courage. And she helps Olivia through her breast cancer.
Okay, that is so good to know. I'm so excited. I can't wait to get that one.
That's one of the neat things about novelettes, because you can take a character from another work and flesh that character out and give them their own stories.
Yes, I'm learning that. Up until a few years ago, I had only been reading textbooks, and I didn't even remember the joy of reading, the joy of reading nonfiction. And I remember my husband saying, well, you're not in school anymore. I graduated in 2012 with my PhD, but I still kind of stayed in that technical writing, military writing, academic writing. And he asked me one day, well, what do you enjoy? And I had to think about it. And I said, well, I used to really enjoy reading. So then I started I was like, all right, well, I need to get some books. And I met Sandra from Celebrate Lit, and she did some publicity for 2 of my nonfiction books. And then I was just so intrigued by all these books that she was promoting, and one thing led to another. And anyway, I started reading a lot of fiction books, and I set a goal of, I'm going to challenge myself to do 24, and lo and behold, I'm at 50 now or something. So
wow,
I'm loving it. And yours was one of them. So
yeah, reading fiction is one of my great loves.
it just takes you away. I love it. I love it. So again, friends, here's where you can find Susan's website and her books. You can also find her on Goodreads. Here's the Goodreads address there, URL. And then remember the tagline. I just love that tagline. Perfect. Now tell me about your research. So you talked about it a little bit before I introduced the book, but how did you decide that when you first started writing? I guess because you just said Carmen was in a previous book. Well, how did you decide she was going to be in the Army? And how did you even know about a weapons specialist? What goes into your process for research?
Sometimes it's just a thought gets into my head, and that's one of those things where characters can develop on their own sometimes. And as I was writing Faces, I wanted to have her, Olivia's best friend Carmen, have a background, and I wanted her to have a strong background. And just kind of came to me that she could be in a group of women that are PhDs, and she could be something totally different, and she's strong, because I wanted her to be strong for Olivia. So those kind of things just happen. And as I was writing Carmen, having already decided from the previous novel that she was she's in a Hispanic family, and all of this kind of stuff, that I needed to learn a little bit more about the Hispanic culture. My daughter-in-law is Mexican, first generation Mexican. Oh, wow. And I have tons and tons of Mexican friends. We live in a highly Hispanic area, and I've always had tons of Hispanic friends. So I learned even to cook from one of my friends in college.
Awesome.
I'm visiting her family. I learned how to make menudo in college, but I said, no, I'm not making that anymore. And tamales. Yeah. Too much trouble, but
it takes time.
It does take time. But then when I wanted her to have something to do with a historic, that's not the word I'm looking for, but a gun that would have been handed down in her aunt's family, I I don't know anything about weapons, and
Right.
so but our foster son is a Navy weapons teacher. So I
Okay.
asked him, okay, what weapon might I find in Mexico City that was old? And he thought about it for a few minutes and came up with this. And then that gave me a jumping off place to go and research it online. I also, as far as Mexico City, I have never been to Mexico City. And my daughter in law her family's from a different part of Mexico. So I just asked around and to find out if there's someone who knew a lot about Mexico City and was able to have conversations with people who had lived in Mexico City. So, that was really great. And if I don't know if you noticed, but in the back of Carmen's Journey of Courage, there's a cookbook. And it's
Yes.
full of Mexican recipes. And my former administrative assistant back in the homeschooling community is married to a wonderful Mexican man. And she was taught by her mother-in-law how to make all these wonderful dishes. And
Oh,
I
wow.
love her cooking. And so I asked her, would you put together some recipes for me? So that's where those recipes came from.
Okay. Okay. Yeah,
When I was,
you'll laugh because like I said, my stepfather is Mexican, full Mexican, and every time I would ask my grandma Fina, okay, grandma, how do I make tortillas? She would say, well, mija, this is what you do. A little bit of this, a pinch of that, make sure the water's warm, and knead the masa, and you're like, okay. So I remember my dad and I went home, and he should know how to make them. He's one of 13 children, and they had to make them when they were younger, to help my grandmother when the family's that large. And he couldn't remember how to do it. So there we are in the kitchen making tortillas. And when they were done, they were so hard. We were like throwing them at each other.
frisbees.
So now, fast forward, 20 plus years later, and now that you can buy the pre-made stuff and actually make them, but nothing will come as close to homemade.
Oh, I remember after I was in college and living on my own, and I would ask my mother for some of the family recipes, and she didn't have a recipe for the most part. She just threw it together. And my dad cooked also. I'm from an Italian family, although my mother is English.
Okay.
But so I would go to her house and we would make the recipe. We would make it, and I would jot down notes, and we were trying to say, okay, is this about a tablespoon or whatever? And over a period of years, we came up with a spaghetti sauce recipe, and that's been handed down verbally in our family for years. So I have a few recipes that are family things that we just work at putting together. That's fun.
Well, that's the other thing now I'm starting to cook. Being so busy and finding out that, I found out I was a workaholic, so I would just constantly overwhelm myself. So now with the reading, just finding myself, and which is a God thing, my identity's in God and my joy's in Him, and just learning to find those things all over again. And so anyway, I'm enjoying the reading and enjoying some cooking now. So I didn't have all of my Grandma Breyer's recipe. I'm French on the other side, but she used to bake. She was a baker, and there's all these things. So now I have to go to my cousin. My cousin is the one who did all the baking. So I can, make. She used to make these butter hornets, or some people call them butter horns, and it's like a pastry croissant, except it's sweet, and it's got icing and
Yum. Yum. One
But
of my
anyway.
favorite Italian pastries is called sfogliatelli, and I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but it looks like a clamshell. The pastry looks like a clamshell because there's these layers that kind of pop up, and there's inside is a combination of ricotta cheese and some cream and lemon zest. They're hard to make. I've never made them. Fortunately, I have a really good Italian deli that makes them, but you have to get them really early on Saturday if you want one. And cannoli, we've made cannoli
Yes,
before. Those are more well known.
Yeah, love those. Anything sweet, I love that stuff.
Me too.
I am definitely a sweet eater.
Me too. I was able to get the Italian food in my first novelette, which is A House of Courage, because it's about an Italian family.
Oh, okay.
who own an Italian restaurant and a farm, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's, so I was able to slip in all the little Italian things that, like I did in Carmen's Journey of Courage for the Mexican food,
Okay.
And funny, I used to love to cook. I mean, loved it. And over the last few years, maybe 10 years, I sort of stopped loving it. I think it's because I just got too busy, and too tired.
That happens, yeah.
It takes a lot of time.
It does. It does. So is Carmen the last book in this series, or did you say you have another?
I have actually 2 more in the series called the Faces of Courage series, but they are unrelated to the previous books. The characters are not the same, and there's no more breast cancer in these. My next one, which is in editing now, is called The Fragrance of Violets, and it's about forgiveness. And there is a quote that I'll probably get wrong that's been attributed to Mark Twain, although they say he didn't actually say it, that forgiveness is the aroma of the violets being crushed. Something. I'm sorry. I should have looked that up if I was going to say it.
I gotcha. It happens to me all the time.
I hate when that happens.
Especially when you're feeling things out,
Right.
Yes.
But it's really about forgiveness, about a young woman who was abandoned by her father figure. And then all of a sudden she's thrown into a business relationship with him because she's a sales and catering manager at a large resort, and his son is getting married, and so he is there, and she's on the team for the wedding. That
okay. That sounds good.
There's a lot of angst in there.
Okay, I'm gonna read that one too. I'm gonna have to read them all. Put them all on my list. And that's what I liked about your books too. I know they're in the series, but like you said, the last 2 are standalone. But I felt Carmen's Journey of Courage I didn't know Carmen was in another book, so it was really a standalone too.
Right.
I'm really happy now that I'll get to have more of Carmen in another book, but I didn't feel like I missed out by not reading any of the other books. So that's
none of them. I do make them standalones. Even if they're related character wise, I want them to stand alone, because my second novelette is also about a breast cancer patient, and she appears extremely briefly in the novel Faces of Courage. She's just part of the breast cancer support group, but that Isabel's Mission of Courage is her story, and she has a scene with Olivia from the novel, but some of the characters may appear, but there's no reason that you have to read all the others or read them in order or anything. And there really won't be any repeat of characters in Forgiveness, the Forgiveness of Violets, the Fragrance of Violets. But there will be repeat characters from that in the third novel.
Okay.
Which tentatively is titled Relinquished, and it's about a young woman who gave her child up for adoption, and she discovers that the child has been kidnapped by the child went to a celebrity couple, and she figures out through a set of circumstances that this is a celebrity couple. The child that was kidnapped is her baby.
Oh, wow.
And she feels that she's just pulled into the search for this child. In fact, she really would like to take the child back because feels like the celebrity couple is not doing their job. But so there's a long.
Gotcha.
It's going into a kind of a mystery, which there's a little mystery in Carmen.
Yes, I think that's why I liked it too.
A lot of mystery and suspense in Relinquished.
Oh, okay. I love mystery and suspense, so now I'm even more curious and ready to get it. So get to writing, woman.
I will. And in the back of Fragrance, well, if you pre-order Fragrance of Violets, which happens to be on pre-order all of a sudden, just in the last couple of days, even though it's not out until May, but there's a pre-order bonus, and after you get the book in May, will be a short story in it,
Okay.
which is the prequel to Relinquished, and tells
Okay.
the pre-story of the main
So is
character.
that a pre-order on Amazon or?
Yes, it has. Well, you go on Amazon and you pre-order it, and then you take your receipt and you go to Celebrate Lit, my page on Celebrate Lit, put your receipt in, and then you get that mailed to you
Okay.
after the book release. Or if you wait till the paperback comes out, it's in the back of the paperback.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. This is exciting. Okay. So so you just said what was the next 2 books. So that's awesome. How far do you plan out your writing?
Well, I tend not to plan out too far, but I also have a contract with my publisher to be part of a multi-author series that will be released in 2023, but my first book is due in 2022. However, I just had to turn in my synopses. There will be 12 authors, I think, with each author writing 3 books. That will be each author will have 1 book released a year, and there will be a book released each month of the year.
Okay.
I just had to turn my synopses in for all 3 books. So that I'm having to plan far ahead. Normally I don't. And these are more romance with women's fiction. So a whole nother genre that I'm having to learn how to write.
Now, I know when we were emailing back and forth, you said that you had just gone to a writer's retreat or a writer's conference or something. Do you do that often?
I love writers' retreats and conferences. I do try to go often. In the beginning of my fiction writing career, I was introduced to someone who was starting to put on writers' conferences, and she asked me to be her assistant. So, and that was part of my job in the homeschooling community, was to put on homeschooling events. So I was kind of a natural fit for her.
Yeah.
So we put on 3 or 4 conferences together, one at Mount Herman and a couple down here in Southern California. Mount Herman is up north in Northern California for your national viewers who don't know what Mount Herman is. It's a beautiful conference center. So not only do I enjoy going to them, but I also enjoy putting them on. And I think you might be asking me this question a little bit later, but anybody who wants to become a writer, who wants to become a published author, really, really needs to go to writers' conferences and retreats, especially the conferences. Of course, with the pandemic the last couple of years, there haven't been a lot in person, a lot on Zoom. For me, that's not the same. I want them to be in person.
Yes. I've had a couple of the prominent business folks, Book Funnel. I had Damon Courtney on the podcast. I had Dave Chesney from Kindlepreneur on.
Oh, good.
And both of them were saying, that's how they met each other, was at a conference. You got to get out there and meet people and you kind of help each other too, because if you don't know how to do something, you ask someone else who's already done it. They might be a little ahead of you.
Exactly. Yeah. This last weekend was the writer's retreat that I went to, and I'm not very far along in my career. I mean, only 3 years as a fiction writer is really not very far along, but I was able to pass on some information that I have accumulated to someone who's not quite as far along as I am. And one of my critique partners is also a Celebrate Lit author, and she's kind of just a few months behind me in the journey. And so we're able to share with each other a lot. It's really good to have writing conferences and to be part of writers groups and critique groups. All of those things only help enhance your writing and your journey.
Right. Were you nervous initially with the critiquing? Like, here it is.
Yes. Well, as a journalist and with, copy editors and city editors and all of that, you learn quickly to be, rather hard-skinned and to learn from critiquing, but it can still hurt. But
right.
As I go into the fiction market, it was a little bit different, because the first thing that I had critiqued by a top editor, that's what I was devastated. but she was so accurate. I knew nothing about fiction writing, and that taught me a lot.
Yeah.
So I now it's easy. Now I
Right.
love my critique group, and I have a funny story. We were just organizing this critique group, and the first other gal had written published 4 books, and then this other gal asked if she could join, and she is a PhD, retired PhD in English,
Oh,
PhD professor. And I'm thinking, oh no, grammar Nazi. Oh no, oh no. But she is the sweetest thing, and she is like one of my biggest cheerleaders
awesome.
and helps all of that. So don't be intimidated, viewers. If you're
Right.
thinking about doing this, go into it knowing that only that those things will be helpful to you.
Yes, my editor says, Janine, red means love. Because she knows I am sensitive. She's like, Janine, red means love. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, back to our,
Yeah.
our school days when, red ink all over our essays, right?
Right, exactly. I use green just for that reason because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings.
I used to use blue.
Yeah, see. All right. I know we've shared a lot. Is there any final tips you would like to give the audience to encourage, those wannabe writers or new authors on how to move forward or what to do?
Well, I've said a lot about, going to writers' conferences and making connections there. Just do it. The first thing you have to do is write. If you want to be a published author, you can't do it if you don't write. And that can be intimidating to develop a habit of hopefully every day, but at least on a regular schedule where you write whether you feel like it or not. You don't wait for a muse to show up. You just do it. And if you can't have anything to write nonsense for a little while or use writing prompts. But the most important thing the first thing to becoming a published author is to write. None of this other stuff will help if you don't write. But get yourself into a community of writers. There's lots of things, communities on Facebook to join, lots of conferences to go to. You can go from there and get as I said, critique groups and things like American Christian Fiction Writers, which I am the president of the Orange County chapter. There are lots of community in that as well. So write and get yourself involved with a lot of writers and study. Read craft books, read craft books.
Thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast, sharing about your books, sharing about your process, and this great advice. And just your personality. I had so much fun. And like I said, I look forward to reading more of your books. You write beautifully. You are I know you said you're new and you're still learning, but I tell you, when I read those words, you're a master of your craft to me. And
well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate being invited and talking with you. And again, I can't tell you how much I appreciated your wonderful review coming from someone with the background and the information that I was across. It made me feel, okay, I did my job. I got the details right. Because authors just hate to get details wrong and a reader say, oh, that doesn't ring true,
Right,
so thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. And again, I appreciate you coming on the show. I'll have you come back on with the next 2 books so you can give an update to our audience.
I would love it. Thank you very much.
All right, Susan, have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Well, there you have it, friends. We got to hear directly from Susan about her process and what she's doing, what she's done to date. And like she said, if you want to be a published author, if you're new in the journey, you got to write. You won't get there if you don't try. So write, friends. So next week, I'm excited to share that we have Sandra from Celebrate Lit Publicity Group coming on. You heard Susan talk a little bit about Celebrate Lit. So you'll actually get to learn a lot from Sandra next week. So next Thursday, 11 a.m., join us again so you can get some really good tips from Sandra about publishing your book and potentially, hiring a publicity group such as Celebrate Lit. So that's all I have for today, friends. Thank you so much for joining. We'll see you next week. Bye.